So going to the next step, I want to talk a little bit about some updates on the custom terrain, right? So updates in best practice, right? So we have a new update where now when you're creating a custom terrain, every time that you place a point, that point we before it was on the point was only being placed on the actual terrain cmBuilder. Now the points can be placed on imported surfaces. So these surfaces can be either like a Google Maps model or a topography model or even your uh, building model itself, right? So in that case, like you're gonna use to place the points where like in the geometry that you have imported that refers to the terrain, and then like the software will adapt the terrain to that shape, right? So let's see what will be the process to do something like this. So let me move these controls out of the way. So I have this scenario over here, a clear scenario with no buildings. I just cleared it up to show like what will be the process if I decide to bring in a scan import to this area. So if I put in this FBX model that's coming from Google Maps, or it can be from a drone import or anything like that, you can bring in your model and then you're going to position it, right? So drone models, you can try to use the geolocation tool to position it automatically, but the Google Maps model, they won't be geolocated, so we need to locate them manually. And usually when you bring them in, they are always rotated 180 degrees. So you can either change it, the value over here on the Z rotation, or you can hold shift and drag your rotation dial to like set up 180 degrees rotation. And then I'm gonna move this guy down just because I want to see like some references that exist over here so I can position it on the X and Y. So I'm gonna use like any building as a reference, maybe this guy over here, and then I can go and move the building, the, the model to the right spot. But now I need to position this model at the right elevation. So here comes a tip that a lot of people don't know this, right? Whenever you're moving an imported model, like either if it's a scan or like a beam model, you can always choose where your handles are located. So if I click on this button and go into user origin, I can relocate my handles and place that handle at a location that I know the elevation for. So let's say that I know the elevation for this flat area over here. I can click on this area, and now my handle is like these values for position are referring to this point specifically. So if I know the elevation for this point, I can go in here and type in the elevation, let's say 87 meters, right? So when I move this down, it's showing that whole model at the correct sea level elevation. And now I can see that my terrain in cmBuilder actually is higher, like than it's supposed to be at that point, right? So the way to fix this is to go into the custom terrain tool, and we're going to create a custom terrain from points. Why can't use the model? Because if I use the custom terrain from model right now and I select this imported model as my reference for the terrain, cmBuilder will understand the way that the tool works is that we will track what is the bottom surface of this model. Let me just show the surface. So we will track the shape of the bottom of the surface, and we will try to match that whole elevation, you know? So like the buildings will have openings, like vegetation will have openings looking from the bottom, and that will simply to understand that those points are supposed to be filled with the terrain, right? So your terrain will look just like the smash. So in that case, we are going to go ahead and use the custom terrain from points. So I need to place points on my mesh, right? The mesh that I imported. But in this case, the mesh is lower than my actual terrain. So before I start that tool, I'm going to go back and I'm going to hide my map. So I'm now looking at just the imported shape. So when I go into my custom terrain with points, every time that I place a point, will be placed on top of that mesh. So this is the change that we had from before. Before we couldn't track where the terrain, oh, like the point placement was not finding the shapes of your imported mesh, but now you can simply place points over here and then cmBuilder will adapt its terrain using these points as references, right? This is a huge mesh, so we could spend some time over here creating a lot of points. So in this case, there is a little tip is that when you know where your project area is supposed to be, let's say at this location, you can focus on creating a higher density of points at this area, and you don't need to put like points super close to each other. If you have like a distance of like 4 to 5 meters from each point, that it's totally fine. And then for other areas, like let's say you want this tool to also impact other locations, you can go in and then place last points on these areas. But keep in mind that for like roads or anything like that, it's always good to place points on both sides of the road, because you want to show that this whole location over here is at a specific elevation. Okay, so if I place all of these points, I can now hit confirm. I'm not going to see the result right away because my terrain is hidden. But if I go back and turn on my terrain, you're going to see that now there is these two shapes are more blended, right? Like my original terrain that the terrain cmBuilder is now more adapted to the shape of this map, right? So this is a good way for you to kind of like fix your terrain without having to go for a lot of process to isolate just that shape whenever you want to create a new terrain cmBuilder. Okay. So yeah, so this will be like a good way to use this tool. But also I noticed that like a lot of times people are importing models in cmBuilders with the topography coming from Revit, something like this, right? So in this case, there are two options for you. One is to use the same instructions that I just did right now, placing points on top of this face, or you can import this model in a different way. So the way that the custom terrain tool works is that we would track the bottom surface of the imported shape. So if I try to create a custom terrain using this shape over here, like cmBuilder will look from below and we'll say, oh, actually your terrain is flat and it's at this elevation. We don't track the top one, we track the bottom shape of your model. So because of that, we need to isolate that shape, right? So this is very common whenever you're working with Revit files, Revit models, you're gonna have like a topographic solid, like a topo solid in there. And the way that I suggest for you to do this kind of like isolation is to, one, filter this model to see only the topo solid. So you can go into your visibility and graphic overrides, you turn everything off, and then you go over here in topo solid and turn it on, right? And this will keep your like just what is tagged as topo solid. You can explode this and remove the other parts like streets and things like that and export this to FBX, or you can just like bring this whole model to Blender directly, and then from here you do your kind of like cleaning up, right? So when you bring this model, you export the FBX from Revit, bring the model into Blender, and then in Blender, we're gonna go ahead and like clean this up a little bit more. It will look like this once you bring it over. So you can select the parts that are not referring to the terrain and then just delete them, like something like this. Or you can hide them if you wanna keep them, but it's up to you. Whoops. And I can go ahead and delete all of these parts. So now like the shape that I have over here relates only to the terrain. And for me to isolate the top surface of this model, I will click on the model, and then I'm going to go over here on the top and click on edit mode. So edit mode will give me the access to all the points and all the vertices, all the edges that composes this geometry, all the faces, right? So it might be a little bit overwhelming to look at all of this like this. And usually when you work with FBX imports in Blender, you're gonna have these like blue lines that might be a little bit annoying. So to remove the blue lines, a quick tip is to change your selection to edge, and then you can right click, and then you can clear, I think it's clear sharp. Oh, you need to select everything. Clear sharp. There you go. So it removes all of those blue lines. And then you can go ahead and select your points again. Your select mode will be related to the vertex. You look from the sideways by clicking on this X function over here. And then you go ahead, select all of those points, and then you can delete these vertices. So now you isolate that shape that is related only to the top of your topography, right? Another thing is that usually these models from Revit, they will show the excavation shape of for your building, but this excavation needs to be created in Builder, right? So depending on what is the purpose of like your custom terrain, you can also clean this up over here with the same method. You go in, look sideways, and then you start deleting the points that will refer to that excavation to keep like just that top surface. And don't worry about keeping like an opening like this. cmBuilder is ready to fill this void over here with terrain by an extrapolation of these points. But if you want to fill this in with like more information that you have, you're welcome to do so. Okay, so now we're in possession of like a model like this. I can export this as an FBX and then position that in cmBuilder accordingly, and then use that as my reference to recreate this terrain. Let me see if I already did this. No, I have a Google terrain over here, but I think that I already imported for this Revit terrain. Let me see. So my Revit terrain is over there at the bottom because it's trying to position it according to the Google Maps. Then I'm going to snap to the position of my structural model. And apparently I just need to rotate it. But anyways, like you can position this accordingly. And then when you have it in the right spot, you can now use that surface as your reference for your custom terrain. So if I go back on my custom terrain tool, I can now use this new model as my reference for the terrain when I load it. Like this smoothing distance value is what we use to propagate the impact of this action to the areas where there is no surface. So this will also impact on how cmBuilder will fill in this gap over here. So I usually put this like over the middle over here because like it gives me a good propagation related to that shape. So now when I do that, cmBuilder will track the shape of my terrain using that new surface, as you can see over here. Cool. There you go. So this is how you would convert a topo solid into a surface before you bring it into cmBuilder. So you have a couple of options whenever you have a model from Revit. One is to do this placement of points on top of your surface, and the other one is to clean it up a little bit and then bring in the model into cmBuilder.